name is Ana del Castillo, and I currently serve as an Andrew Goodman Foundation Puffin Democracy Fellow. And my project title is We See You, a national movement for fair redistricting. And so why this project? When talking about the importance of gerrymandering, Barack Obama said that the movement for fair maps will determine the course of progress on every issue we care about for the next decade. Gerrymandering is a silent crime that we know is happening, yet we aren't doing enough to end it. The majority of Americans don't even know what gerrymandering is, let alone how it creates gridlock and prevents people with marginalized identities from being represented in Congress. As an AGF Puffin Democracy Fellow, I am creating a movement to call for fair districts and an end to partisan gerrymandering. Through the development of an online day of advocacy, teach-in series, and advocacy toolkit, this project is spreading awareness about the detriments of gerrymandering and equipping young people with the tools they need to propose community-based alternatives. So as I mentioned, my name is Ana. I take she, her pronouns, and I actually was a former Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassador at Tufts University. So shout out to all my jumbos watching this. And I currently serve as a diversity, inclusion, and belonging specialist for a tech company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This is my Instagram information, as well as my email if you want to jot it down and get in touch with me. So rather than begin by telling you why redistricting is important, I wanted to show you this video clip. And so this video comes from a really powerful film called Slay the Dragon. You all should watch it. It's on Hulu. And actually, Katie Fahey, whose name you'll hear in this documentary, like this movie is so much about her story, actually partnered with my Puffin Democracy project and served as a panelist for the National Day of Advocacy that AGF hosted. So shout out to her. And with that, I will begin the video.
As important as 2008 was, 2010 is to be a more important election. 2010 is a census year, and we redistrict every state and congressional seat following the census.
You win state legislation in 2010, you get to draw the new maps that control all the elections over the next decade.
The winner is pre-decided just by the way that the districts are drawn.
Even under the scenario of the Democrats winning the vote by the biggest margin they've ever won in modern Wisconsin history, the Republicans would still get 59 seats minimum. That's an astonishing manipulation of democracy.
Congress would never fix this problem because they have one interest only, and this is to stay in power.
It's the biggest heist in modern American political history.
I'm Katie Fahey. I'm with an organization called Voters Not Politicians. We started from a Facebook post. I saw that there was a pent-up energy, so I just thought I'd, try.
First there was 10,000, then there was 20,000, and this thing just sparked.
We're working with the anti-gerrymandering drive.
They're absolutely worried about us. They know that once this gets on the ballot, it almost always passes.
This is going to be the battlefield moving forward. If they lose, it's no holds barred.
There will be a vicious fight by the people who are in power.
We are seeing efforts to undermine the very core values of American democracy.
This may be the last time we have an opportunity to do something about partisan gerrymandering.
The people of our country are sick of this, and if we don't come and say that enough is enough, then nothing's going to change.
Yes, so gerrymandering. This is probably a term that you've heard before, but maybe you're not quite familiar with exactly what it is. So gerrymandering is when politicians pick their voters instead of voters picking their elected officials, and it impacts communities across the nation. So as you heard in the video, redistricting happens every 10 years following the census. And we just completed a census in 2020, meaning that 2021 is a redistricting year. In fact, we're gearing up for the redistricting process right now as we speak. And so if we don't push for fair districts now, we're going to have to wait another decade. And so that's why redistricting is so, so important. And it's critical that young people advocate for fair districts. So here are two typical examples of how gerrymandering happens. You have the example of packing, which is right here on the far left, and then cracking, the example right next to it. So packing is when legislators concentrate the opposing party's voters into one district to reduce their voting power in another district. Cracking is splitting a community into multiple districts, diluting voting power of the opposing party. So I just want to say at the start that both political parties are guilty of partisan gerrymandering. So this is something that we see both Democrats and Republicans doing. So if you look at these examples, in this district right here, we have 5 yellow and 0 green. So this means this could be 5 Republican parties and 0 Democrat majority parties. Same here with this district. It's split up in such a way where the voting power of the yellow party is diluted. If you look here at this proportional example, it's pretty fair, right? 3 yellow, 2 green, 3 yellow, 2 green, which is very much representative of the population in these districts. So another thing that happens after the census is apportionment. And we already got that data. So did your state gain, lose, or remain the same? And by that, I mean that the United States House of Representatives is fixed at 435 reps. But how many reps each state has is determined after a census year. So this is just another thing to note when we talk about redistricting. We're also talking about how many US reps each state gets. So what exactly is redistricting? It's a process of drawing new congressional and state legislative district boundaries. So after the 2020 census, states will draft their own district maps, and this process looks differently in each state. So federal law requires that districts must have nearly equal populations, that the process not dilute voting strength, and that outlaws discrimination on the basis of race or color in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Federal law also recognizes the protection of communities of interest. So communities of interest could look like a college campus, right? So what communities should not be split up because it makes sense for their population to be together. And that's why I think it's really important that Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassadors are talking about redistricting, because we often see college campuses being sites that are split apart to dilute student voting power. So it's really important that universities are able to be counted as communities of interest. I think that this Eric Holder quote is also really important. If you read it, it talks a little bit about why fair maps are critically important. So redistricting, what should be some guiding criteria? Population equity, compactness and continuity, respect for communities of interest, that they follow local boundaries, that they use visible geographic features and undivided tracts, so natural boundaries, and that that we don't have racial gerrymandering. So like putting a whole population in one district and trying to dilute their power. And that boundaries can comply with anti-discrimination provisions. And some partisan considerations are okay, but definitely we can't have them being the majority, the main factor of why districts are being drawn. So we obviously don't like partisan gerrymandering. That is not cool. That is why we see the diluting of many communities of color. We see diluted political power of students. And so what is an alternative? Here are some alternatives that I've been researching. The first is independent redistricting commissions. So in theory, these independent, so not partisan commissions would eliminate any partisan or political influence on the process altogether. The second solution is community mapping processes. So similar to a town hall, members of a community can come together and actually sit in a room and draw the maps and say, oh, actually, this district should look like this because we know this community of interest is here, or I think that this line would be fair. So it really is based and rooted in co-creation and community effort. The third alternative is expanding existing commissions. So some states do have their own redistricting commission, but they're comprised of hegemonic identities. So what if we could expand those commissions to include diverse perspectives of students and working class people, and that we had more people of color and more women on those commissions? So that is one alternative. Now, I want you to think about and maybe take a screenshot of this slide. What does redistricting look like in your state? So as I mentioned, the redistricting process is different for many states. And so to find out what it looks like in your specific state, you can go to ballotpedia.org/redistricting. Spend some time reading through that information and then ask yourself these questions. What is the redistricting process like in your state? Who are the power holders in charge of making decisions? And what do you think a fair process would look like? So back to my project. What have I been up to for the last almost year and a half? Is really talking to young people and spreading awareness about the detriments of gerrymandering, because it's something that we don't talk about. And now you might hear more discussions about gerrymandering, redistricting in the news because it is a redistricting year. But in my mind, I'm just like, this is such an injustice. We need to be talking about this all the time. So in order to do issue awareness, I've been focusing on activism trainings. So right here, you see this title, Fair Districts Now, National Day of Advocacy. And Andrew Goodman Foundation partnered with Ignite National to host this long day of advocacy. It was on March 5th. It was really awesome. We had over 100 participants. Hopefully some people watching this right now were able to attend. And we've also been doing some training on, what is gerrymandering? And we've really been talking about the For the People Act, which I'll touch upon later in this presentation. And the second part of my project, which will hopefully be something that you all can use, is the creation of an advocacy toolkit. So just, I wanted to show you some of the speakers that we had at our National Day of Advocacy. We had Stephanie Young, who's now the executive director of When We All Vote. We had some representatives from Ignite National. We also had Katie Fahey, who is the executive director of The People. So she's like, in my opinion, the queen of ending gerrymandering. And just, we'll show you some other folks that we had. Rep. Nugent from Michigan, also very active in ending gerrymandering. And then Carol Cunningham, who works for Fair Districts Pennsylvania. We also had a legislative advocacy training led by Jocelyn Yao, who's a policy manager for Ignite National. And so why I wanted to show you this is because I want each of you to read about the For the People Act if you haven't already. So I know the Andrew Goodman Foundation is really championing this bill. And so I hope that each of you kind of knows what it does. It did pass the House back in March, and it needs 60 votes to pass in the Senate. But what the For the People Act would do is curb extreme partisan gerrymandering by ensuring that states draw congressional districts using independent redistricting commissions whose members represent diverse communities across the state. It would also establish fair redistricting criteria and mandate greater transparency for the redistricting process. So the For the People Act would really help us eliminate gerrymandering. And it's really exciting that it's already passed in the House and that it could very well, with a lot of people energy, pass in the Senate. So if you are interested in advocating for this bill, here's just some tips that I had, but send a personal email and letter to your senator and tell them why you think it's important. Also, social media is a great tool to raise awareness and to rally support. And like I said, I'm creating an advocacy toolkit, which I hope to get to you all in the next month or two. But think about that opening video of Katie Fahey, who posted something on Facebook, and then it turned into a mass movement, which changed the redistricting process in the state of Michigan. Maybe you could be the next Katie Fahey. And even if you don't speak directly to a lawmaker, make sure that you pass along a message to them. So those are just some of my legislative advocacy tips. And in conclusion, I really hope that this was a useful presentation and that you continue advocating for the For the People Act, research who is advocating for fair redistricts in your state, and advocate for your campus to be considered as a community of interest. Thanks so much.